The market is more volatile than ever, and 2023 looks like it will be more of the same. You may be on the fence with buying your first home, but what you need to remember is that owning a home is the single best way to hedge against inflation. But before you go out and make an offer, I wanted to give you 5 tips of things to arm yourself with the right information so that you can get the most out of that first home purchase. Let's get started. Tip number 1 is to make sure you have the right pre-approval amount on the pre-approval letter. Now, before you start the home buying process, you need to get pre-approved, preferably with a local lender. However, when you go to make an offer, it's not always a good idea to give that seller the pre-approval letter that you received from the lender. Now, there's a couple schools of thought, and it varies depending on the market. One school of thought is to make the pre-approval amount the exact same amount as the sale price on the offer. Because if the seller knows how much you're pre-approved for, they may, not always, but they may use that to their advantage during the negotiation process. However, it can also backfire, because if you go into an offer with a pre-approval amount with the exact same amount of money as the offer amount, that may tell the seller that that's all you can afford. So as a listing agent, when I'm representing a seller, if I get a pre-approval letter for the exact same amount as the offer amount, my concern is, what if interest rates change? Does that buyer now become disqualified? Will that buyer be able to weather the storm? What if something happens along the way? How close are they to their qualifying amount if all of a sudden their credit score changes? And, will that change their qualifications and now they're not qualified to buy the home? Ideally, a seller will look for a buyer that's actually approved for more than what the purchase price is, because that means they'll be less likely to have issues during the final approval process. The important thing is to talk to your agent to find out what the situation is with the seller to see which strategy makes sense. What I will typically do is I will reach out to the seller's agent, try to get as much information as possible on that seller. Because every situation is different, the more information I can get from the listing agent, the better off we'll be in terms of crafting the right offer for this particular seller. The important thing is that you know the right strategy for that particular seller and that particular property. Tip number 2 is seller concessions. A seller concession is when the seller agrees to pay for something above and beyond the purchase price, repairs, buy downs, closing costs, etc. Over the last 2 years, because the market was so competitive, seller concessions took a back seat. Now with the market changing and softening, we're seeing more and more sellers being willing to agree to these seller concessions. Now, one of those seller concessions are rate buy downs. And buy downs can be done a couple different ways. Now, the mortgage term buy down buys down the rate for the entire length of the loan. A 30-year fixed rate mortgage, typically a buy down will be 0.5%, maybe 0.75%. A 2-1 buy down would be 2% the first year, 1% buy down on the second year, and then the third year would be that original rate that is locked in for the remainder of the 30-year note. Now, the way these are handled is through a closing cost credit. What essentially happens is you'll have your purchase price on your contract, and then the seller will give a closing cost credit of whatever the amount is equal to the buy down. The thing to remember is that there is a limit on how much money you can use as a closing cost credit. If you're putting less than 10% down, the most you can get for a seller credit is 3% of the purchase price. If you're putting more than 10% down, then you can get up to 6% of the purchase price. So the amount of the buy down will depend on the lender, on how much they charge, depending on how much of a buy down you're trying to negotiate. So it's super important that you know how much that buy down is going to cost before you make that offer, so that you can include that closing cost credit request on the original offer form. Now, another seller concession that has made a comeback are repairs. Over the last 2 years, sellers weren't willing to fix anything. Now times have changed. So if something does come up during a home inspection, a routine home inspection, a repair pops up that wasn't visible when you initially walked through the house, you could potentially negotiate with the seller, above and beyond what the closing cost credit is. If you're doing both the buy down and a repair credit, they're two separate entities. The third tip is to pay attention to the days on the market. Now, this is going to differ depending on which county you're in, which town you're in, which part of the country you're in. Every area of the country is reacting differently to this market correction. Here in Plymouth, we're still doing well. It's been about a 4 to 5% depreciation, which is much better than a lot of the rest of the country. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that a seller that puts the house on the market within the first week is going to be willing to drop that price and accept a lower offer. What's important to look at is what is the average days on market for the area that you're looking in. If the average days on market, the amount of time between the property was listed and an offer was accepted, is 25 days, for example, then it's probably highly likely that the seller is not going to accept a lower offer before that 25th day. However, if you see a property in the market, it's been on the market for 30 days, the average on the market is 25 days, 21 days, then I would make an offer that is lower on that particular property because it exceeds the average amount of time that a property in that area takes to sell. Even with the market softening, I'm still seeing properties selling at or a little bit above list price if the property was priced properly. If a seller puts the property on the market based on current comparables and the price is in line with true market value, then the property is going to sell right away regardless of the interest rates and softening market. But if the seller is looking at comparables from 6 months ago, then it's going to be a total different story, and that seller will likely need to do a price change and maybe negotiate down on the sale price. So make sure you do your homework on the particular area that you're looking to make an offer on and know what the normal days on market is. Now, tip number 4 is kind of an extension of tip number 3, and that is to make sure your agent does the research. Now, when I'm working with a buyer client, I will try to do as much research on a property as possible before we make an offer. Try to find out, why is the seller selling? How long have they been there? How many mortgages do they have? We won't necessarily know exactly how much money they owe, but we can have a general idea through the registry of deeds how many liens they have on the property and how much those mortgages were for originally. How does that property compare to other homes in the area with its condition? Is it in better condition? Is it in worse condition? When I look at the market stats for the town of Plymouth, that does not apply equally to every single neighborhood, every single street, every single part of town. It is just a median for all the properties combined. So every town, every little neighborhood is going to have its own little niche. That's why I think it's super important to work with agents that know the area that you're looking to buy in. I know it's super tempting to work with Aunt Sally because you want to help her out, but she lives an hour away and doesn't know anything about the town that you want to live in, but she can definitely do an offer because after all, it's just paper and contracts and she knows the process. It's not the same. It's absolutely not the same. To know exactly what's happening in a town, it's crucial to not only know about the property, but maybe know the future of that property. I will routinely refer clients out to other agents if I get approached about a buyer that wants to buy in a property that I don't service. I will not, even if it's only a 40-minute drive, 45-minute drive, if I don't know that town, then I'm doing them a disservice. Now, I just wanted to take a minute to mention that over the last 15 years, I have been coached by the largest real estate coaching company in the country. And being part of a network of agents in this coaching company, network that consists of all the top best agents in the country, I have established relationships with dozens and dozens of excellent agents. So even though I only service the Plymouth County area, if you are looking to buy in another area, you're watching this video and you live in San Diego, you live in Texas, you live in Utah, and you're looking to move to Oregon or Florida and you don't know who to call, please reach out. There's going to be a link below in the comments section here, and just click on that link, fill out the quick form, and I will absolutely connect you within 24 hours with a great agent in that area. Now, tip number 5 is specifically for Massachusetts, but it is to make sure you know what the story is with the Title V inspection. The state of Massachusetts requires that if you have a private septic system, that you need to have a licensed inspector inspect that septic system prior to you selling the property. Now, this can be something that could derail the transaction. It could delay the transaction. Because if the seller puts the property on the market and the Title V inspection has not been done, that is a big question mark on the outcome. What if this Title V inspection fails? What if the seller says, I'm not going to repair the septic system right now. I'm going to take the house off the market for 6 months, and then I'll get it fixed, and then I'll put it back on the market. Now your deal is not going to go anywhere. Maybe you've had your application in for your mortgage, you've spent money on your home inspection, and then you find out the Title V's done, and the seller says the whole deal was subject to them doing a Title V. They did the Title V failed, now the seller can back out, and the deal's dead. And now you are out the money on the home inspection. The other thing that could happen is if the Title V fails and the system needs to be replaced, the seller may agree to do that. However, the average time frame for getting a septic system replaced is roughly about 2 months, depending on what time of year it is, soil conditions, the local board of health, a number of different items. So if you look at the average time frame for a closing, start to finish is about 45 days, and then a septic system takes a minimum of about 60 days, you're not going to close on time. I had a situation just not too long ago, earlier this year, and we were delayed for well over 6 weeks past the closing date because of the fact that the septic failed. Now, that may not be such a big deal if you are paying cash or you have a very aggressive rate lock. But if you have a standard rate lock for 45 days or even 60 days, once that rate lock expires, if you're not closed and the rates have gone up, now you're looking at having to relock the rate at a higher rate, which will cost you money over the life of the loan. And if you've already negotiated a buy down with the seller for the rate and you're at your max amount for the closing cost, you can't just buy down the rate further at that point. You're going to be stuck at whatever that new rate is. So in a perfect scenario, the seller will have the Title V done before the house goes on the market. Now, when you make your offer, you are well aware that there will be an extended time frame for closing because the seller needs to repair the septic system. Buying your first home does not need to feel like you're getting a root canal. You need to do your homework, do the research, know what you're walking into when you're making that offer. Now, if you want more information, make sure to check out my video on the 5 tips that all first-time home buyers should know about when they're getting ready for the process of buying their first home. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.